The Frankfurt Parliament was the first freely elected parliament for all of Germany, elected on 1 May 1848. The session was held from 18 May 1848 to 31 May 1849, in the Paulskirche at Frankfurt am Main. Its existence was both part of and the result of the March Revolution in the states of the German Confederation. After long and controversial debates, the Assembly produced the so-called Frankfurt Constitution, which proclaimed a German empire based on the principles of parliamentary democracy. This constitution fulfilled the main demands of the liberal and nationalist movements of the Wehrmacht and provided a foundation of basic rights, both of which stood in opposition to Metternich's system of restoration. The parliament also proposed a constitutional monarchy headed by a hereditary emperor. The Prussian King Frederick William IV refused to accept the office of emperor when it was offered to him on the grounds that such a constitution, and such an offer, were an abridgment of the rights of the princes of the individual German states. In the 20th century, however, major elements of the Frankfurt Constitution became models for the Weimar Constitution of 1919 and the Basic Law for the Federal Republic of Germany of 1949. Background: Napoleonic upheavals and German Confederation. In 1806, the Emperor, Francis II, had relinquished the crown of the Holy Roman Empire and dissolved the empire. This was the result of the Napoleonic Wars and of direct military pressure from Napoleon Bonaparte. After the victory of Prussia, the United Kingdom, Russia and other states over Napoleon in 1816, the Vienna Congress created the German Confederation. Austria dominated this system of loosely connected, independent states, but the system failed to account for the rising influence of Prussia. After the so-called Wars of Liberation, many contemporaries had expected a nation-state solution and thus considered the subdivision of Germany as unsatisfactory. Apart from this nationalist component, calls for civic rights influenced political discourse. The Napoleonic Code Civil had led to the introduction of civic rights in some German states in the early 19th century. Furthermore, some German states had adopted constitutions after the foundation of the German Confederacy. Between 1819 and 1830, the Karlsbad decrees and other instances of restoration politics limited such developments. The unrest that resulted from the 1830 French July Revolution led to a temporary reversal of that trend. But after the demonstration for civic rights and national unity at the 1832 Hamback Festival, and the abortive attempt at an armed rising in the 1833 Frankfurter Wahnsturm, the pressure on representatives of constitutional and democratic ideas was raised through measures such as censorship and bans on public assemblies. The 1840s. The mid-1840s saw an increase of the frequency of internal crises. This was partially the result of large-scale political developments, such as the escalation of the future of the duchies of Schleswig and Holstein and the erection of Bundesfestungen at Rastatt and Ulm. Additionally, a series of bad harvests in parts of Germany, notably the southwest, led to widely spread famine-related unrest. The changes caused by the beginnings of industrialization exacerbated social and economic tensions considerably. Meanwhile, in the reform-oriented states, such as Baden, the development of a lively scene of Vereine provided an organizational framework for democratic, or popular, opposition. Especially in southwest Germany, censorship could not effectively suppress the press. At such rallies by as the Offenburg Popular Assembly of September 1847, radical Democrats called to overthrow the status quo. At the same time, the bourgeois opposition had increased its networking activities and began coordinating its activities in the individual chamber parliaments more and more confidently. Thus, at the Heppenheim Conference on the 10th of October 1847, 18 liberal members from a variety of German states met to discuss common motions for a German nation-state. In 1847 and 1848, broader European developments aggravated this tension. In France, revolutionary workers and students deposed the citizen King Louis Philippe in the February Revolution. Their action resulted in the declaration of the Second Republic. In many European states, the resistance against restoration policies increased and led to revolutionary unrest. In several parts of the Austrian Empire, namely in Hungary, Bohemia, Romania, and throughout Italy, in particular in Sicily, Rome, and northern Italy, there were bloody revolts, replete with calls for local or regional autonomy and even for national independence. Friedrich Daniel Bassmann, a liberal deputy in the second chamber of the Parliament of Baden, helped to trigger the final impulse for the election of a pan-German assembly. On the 12th of February 1848, referring to his own motion in 1844 and a comparable one by Karl Theodor Welcker in 1831, he called for a representation, elected by the people, at the Bundestag in Frankfurt am Main. The Bundestag, made up of representatives of the individual princes, was the only institution representing the whole Confederation. 2 weeks later, news of the successful coup in France fanned the flames of the revolutionary mood. The revolution on German soil began in Baden, with the occupation of the Ständehaus at Karlsruhe. This was followed in April by the Heckezug, the first of 3 revolutionary risings in the Grand Duchy. Within a few days and weeks, the revolt spread to the other German principalities. The March Revolution. The central demands of the German opposition were the granting of basic and civic rights regardless of property requirements, the appointment of liberal governments in the individual states, and most importantly the creation of a German nation-state, with a pan-German constitution and a popular assembly. On the 5th of March 1848, opposition politicians and state deputies met at the Heidelberg Assembly to discuss these issues. They resolved to form a war parliament, which was to prepare the elections for a national constitutional assembly. They also elected a committee of 7, which proceeded to invite 500 individuals to Frankfurt. This development was accompanied and supported since early March by protest rallies and risings in many German states, including Baden, the Kingdom of Bavaria, the Kingdom of Saxony, the Kingdom of Württemberg, Austria, and Prussia. Under such pressure, the individual princes recalled the existing conservative governments and replaced them with more liberal committees, the so-called March governments. On the 10th of March 1848, the Bundestag of the German Confederation appointed a committee of 17 to prepare a draft constitution. On the 20th of March, the Bundestag urged the states of the Confederation to call elections for a constitutional assembly. After bloody street fights in Prussia, a Prussian National Assembly was also convened, with the task of preparing a constitution for that kingdom. The war parliament was in session at the Paulskirche in Frankfurt from the 31st of March to the 3rd of April, chaired by Karl Joseph Anton Mittermeier, with the support of the moderate liberals, and against the opposition of the radical Democrats. It decided to cooperate with the Bundestag to form a national constitutional assembly which would write a new constitution for the transitional period until the actual formation of that assembly. The war parliament formed formed the Committee of 50, as a representation to face the German Confederation. The electoral law for the new National Assembly was up to the individual states of the Confederation, who chose different solutions. Württemberg-Holstein, the electorate of Hesse-Kassel and the 4 remaining free cities held direct elections. Most states chose an indirect procedure, usually involving a first round voting to constitute an electoral college which chose the actual deputies in a second round. There also were different arrangements regarding the right to vote, as the Frankfurt guidelines only stipulated that voters should be independent adult males. The definition of independence was handled differently from state to state and was frequently the subject of vociferous protests. Usually, it was interpreted to exclude the recipients of any poverty-related support, but in some areas it also barred any person who did not have a household of their own, including apprentices living at the masters' homes. Even with restrictions, however, it is estimated that about 85% of the male population could vote. In Prussia, the definition used would have pushed this up to 90%, whereas the laws were much more restrictive in Saxony, Baden and Hanover. Originally, 649 electoral districts had been agreed upon, but eventually only approximately 585 members were elected. Boycotts in several Austrian constituencies with non-German populations and complications in Tiengen caused the discrepancy. Organization of the National Versammlung. Social background of the deputies. The social makeup of the total of 809 or 812 members of the Frankfurt National Assembly was very homogeneous. Throughout the session, the parliament mostly represented the educated bourgeoisie. 95% of deputies had the Abitur. More than 3/4 had been to university, half of which had studied jurisprudence. A considerable number of deputies were members of a corps or a Burschenschaft. In terms of profession, upper-level civil servants formed the majority. This group included a total of 436 deputies, including 49 university lecturers or professors, 110 judges or prosecutors, and 115 high administrative clerks and district administrators. Due to their oppositional views, many of them had already been in conflict with the princes for several years, including professors such as Jacob Grimm, Friedrich Christoph Dahlmann, Georg Gottfried Jovinus and Wilhelm Eduard Albrecht, and politicians such as WorldCat and Its, who had been champions of constitutional rights for 2 decades. Among the professors, besides lawyers, experts in German studies and historians were especially common, due to the fact that under the sway of Restoration politics, academic meetings in such disciplines, e.g., the Germanistan age of 1846 and 1847, were often the only occasions where national themes could be discussed freely. Apart from those mentioned above, the academic Ernst Moritzardt, Johann Gustav Droysen, Karl Gerup, Friedrich Theodor Vischer and Georg Waitz are especially notable. Because of this composition, the National Assembly was later often dismissively dubbed the Professor in Parliament and ridiculed with verses such as Dreimal 100 Advokaten, the Vatelen, Du bist verraten, Dreimal 100 Professoren, Vatelen, Du bist verloren, 3 times 100 lawyers, Fatherland, you are betrayed, 3 times 100 professors, Fatherland, you are doomed. 149 deputies were self-employed bourgeois professionals, such as lawyers, doctors, journalists or clergymen. including well-known politicians such as Alexander von Swiron, Johann Jacobi, Karl Matthey, Johann Gustav Heckscher, Wilhelm Emanuel von Ketteler and Wilhelm Merschel. The economically active middle class was represented by only about 60 deputies, including many publishers, including Bassmann and Georg Friedrich Kolb, but also businessmen, industrialists and bankers, such as Hermann Henrik Mayer, Ernst Merck, Hermann von Beckerath, Gustav Mevissen and Karl Mez. Tradesmen and representatives of agriculture were very poorly represented. The latter were mostly represented by big landowners from east of the Elbe, accompanied by only 3 farmers. Craftsmen like Robert Blummer, Wilhelm Wolff were associated almost exclusively with the radical democratic left, as they knew the social problems of the underprivileged classes from personal observations. A few of them, e.g. Wolff, already saw themselves as explicit socialists. A further striking aspect is the large number of well-known writers among the deputies, including Anastasius Grun, Johann Ludwig Uhland, Heinrich Lauber and Victor Scheffel. On the 18th of May 1848, circa 330 deputies assembled in the Kaisersaal and walked solemnly to the Paulskirche to hold the first session of the German National Assembly, under its chairman Friedrich Lang. Heinrich von Gagin, one of the best-known liberals throughout Germany, was elected president of the parliament, factions and committees in his opening speech on the 19th of May 1848. Gagin defined the main tasks of the National Assembly as the creation of a constitution for Germany, and the achievement of German unification. This was followed by a total of 230 sessions, supported by 26 committees and 5 commissions, in the course of which the deputies developed the Frankfurt Constitution. While the opening session had generally been quite chaotic, with the deputies seated haphazardly, independent of the political affiliations, ordered parliamentary procedures developed quickly. Soon, deputies started assembling in clubs, which served as discussion groups for kindred spirits and led to the development of Fraktionen, a necessary prerequisite for the development of political majorities. These Fraktionen were perceived as clubs and thus usually named after the location of the meetings. Generally, they were quite unstable, according to the stances, especially on the constitution, on the powers of parliament and on central government as opposed to individual states. They are broadly divided into 3 basic camps: the democratic left, also called the Ganzen in contemporary jargon, consisting of the extreme and the moderate left; the liberal center, the so-called Halben, consisting of the left and right center; the conservative right, composed of Protestants and conservatives. The largest groupings in numerical terms were the Casino, the Württemberger Hof, and beginning in 1849 the combined left, appearing as the Central Marsverein. In his memoirs, the deputy Robert Mell wrote about the formation and functioning of the clubs, that originally there were 4 different clubs, based on the basic political orientations that in regard to the most important major questions, for example about Austria's participation and about the election of emperors, the usual club-based divisions could be abandoned temporarily to create larger overall groups, as the United Left, the Greater Germans in Hotel Schroeder, the Imperials in Hotel Wiedenbusch. These party meetings were indeed an important part of political life in Frankfurt, significant for positive but clearly also for negative results. A club offered a get-together with politically kindred spirits, some of whom became true friends, comparably rapid decisions, and, as a result, perhaps success in the overall assembly. Presidents of the National Assembly: Friedrich Lang as president by seniority, Heinrich von Gagin, Eduard Simpson, Theodor Rey, Friedrich Wilhelm Loh as president of the Stuttgart Rum Parliament. Provisional central power. Since the National Assembly had not been initiated by the German Confederation, it was lacking not only major constitutional bodies, such as a head of state and a government, but also legal legitimation. A modification of the Bundesakte, the constitution of the German Confederation, could have brought about such legitimation, but was practically impossible to achieve, as it would have required the unanimous support of all 38 signatory states. Partially for this reason, influential European powers, including France and Russia, declined to recognize the parliament, while the left demanded to solve this situation by creating a revolutionary parliamentary government. On the 24th of June 1848, the Paulskirche Parliament voted with the 450 votes against 100 for a so-called provisional central power. This newly created provisional government was headed by Archduke Johann of Austria as regent, i.e. as a temporary head of state. Johann named as August von Jochmus as foreign minister and navy minister. The practical task of government was performed by a cabinet consisting of a college of ministers under the leadership of a prime minister. At the same time, the provisional central power built a government apparatus made up of specialized ministries and special envoys, employing, for financial reasons, mainly deputies of the Assembly. After the Bundesversammlung of the German Confederation had declared the end of its work and delegated its responsibilities to the provisional government on the 12th of July 1848, Archduke Johann appointed his first government under Minister-President Prince Karl zu Leiningen on the 15th of July. Minister-Präsidentin of the imperial government Karl zu Leiningen, Anton von Schmerling, Heinrich von Gagen,